Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way. This is a podcast for serious writers who want to develop their skills in artistry and stand out in a crowded industry by taking intelligent, creative risks. I'm your host, Jonathan Ball. I hold a PhD in literature. I'm the author of numerous books, and I take a very analytical approach to art making, emphasizing both efficiency and experimentation. Please consider doing me a favor and pre-ordering my new book from Coach House Books, The National Gallery. It contains sonnets for Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, elegies in the manner of Rilke but for a dead iPhone, and other strange missives from yours truly, the Poet Laureate of Hell. So go to thenationalgallery.ca for more information. That's thenationalgallery.ca. Thanks. Today I'm going to talk to you about a special, weird, experimental book project that I did. I kind of just released this book in 2014 originally, and then I recently just, re-released a print version of it. It was originally an ebook, and now there's also a print companion to the ebook. They have two different titles for a reason I'll get into a little later. The ebook is called This Ebook is Otherwise Provided to You As Is. And you can find out more about it at jonathanball.com/this-ebook. And the print version is This Book is Otherwise Provided to You As Is. You can find that at jonathanball.com/thisbook. No hyphen, just jonathanball.com/thisbook. Those two books are also available on Amazon if you like, but I've priced them higher on Amazon because of a reason I'm going to get into a little bit later. So you better off just get it directly from me. And also if you do decide to get, the print copy of This Book is Otherwise Provided to You As Is. It doesn't say it on the website, but I'm releasing this podcast. And it's kind of a secret bonus that I'll tell you about, is if you buy This Book is Otherwise Provided to You As Is from my website, I'll just give you also a copy of The Politics of Knives. Secret thing, just if you listen to this podcast, you'll know it. Otherwise, no one's going to buy this book because I'm not advertising it or anything really. So I'll know if you ordered it, I'll know you heard about it here. And I'll send you not only the print version of this book, which is, basically pretty rare at this point. I don't think there's more than 4 people on the planet who actually have a copy of this right now. But also I'll send you a copy of my last poetry book with Coach House Books, The Politics of Knives, which, is, really interesting, weird, unusual book that has, won some awards and done fairly well. Now, I want to talk a bit about This Book is Otherwise Provided to You As Is. One, because I just want to explain the concept and the project a little bit. And I just want to walk kind of through the life cycle of a project. So this is a project that I kind of came up with in 2008. I completed it more or less in 2014. And recently I did a print version of it, but it's not really any different from the 2014 version. I just happened to have a print edition made available. So really it's a 2014 book, but it's about 6 years in the making, although of course I wasn't just working on this book for 6 years. And I kind of just did it as a weird kind of experimental project. And I'll get into the history of it a little bit, but I wanted to kind of explain a bit about the life cycle of a project, especially a kind of unusual experimental project that I think really does exemplify writing the wrong way, this kind of uncommon or unconventional way of working or writing. But also I think just to give you a bit of the logic of some of the decisions that happen in the course of a project and how a project might mutate and change in various ways. At the same time, something that I would like to do here is answer some questions I've received about the project. If you go to my Patreon, I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/Jonathan Ball. And you can go there, you can become a patron of me and my work. That helps me do things like publish this podcast. It helps me do weird little projects like this book project. It finally has a print edition because of the support of my patrons and so on. But the other thing it does is it gives you sort of access to all sorts of odd freebies. So I'll just I'm going to have a more structured way of doing the Patreon later. But what I do now is I just sort of post exclusive things that you can't really get anywhere else, digital stuff, on the Patreon feed for my patrons. And then every once in a while, I'll just mail you things. So, I recently, printed this book and mailed it out to all my patrons. So it's kind of just a surprise that, they didn't realize they were getting. And I didn't explain it at all, really. Like, the book has no explanation as to what it is. And so, some questions have kind of come into me about it. And I specifically got some questions from Risha Hancock's, a former student and, now one of the patrons on there. She had a bunch of questions about the book, and I said, I've been meaning to do a podcast about it to kind of, explain this book a little bit. So I'm going to answer some of her questions in the course of doing that. So I just want to say thanks for the questions, Risha. I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. If I remember right, Risha is how you say it. But I appreciate the questions, and I think they're very. I could see in her email that she'd taken a lot of. She'd really read the thing, and I had gone through it with a lot of thought, but it is a mystifying book, and so there are a number of things she kind of hit on that I was planning to talk about, which I will talk about, and then some other questions that she had that I didn't really consider, but I think probably if somebody had actually taken a look at this book, they might have a reasonable question about it. So, all that said, I'm just going to kind of walk a little bit through the origins of this project. So back in 2008, I started to get interested in conceptual poetry and conceptual fiction, and just all sorts of conceptual art, experimental art forms. At the time, I was completing my PhD. I was just, I was living in Calgary. I was just about to move back to Winnipeg, and I started to get a bunch of emails from spam bots. So at the time that I'm getting these emails, I want to point out I'm in a literature PhD program. I'm studying with people like Christian Book, who, this experimental poet who is there at the time. I'm reading a lot of experimental and conceptual writing. A book, I can't remember if the book came out then or not, but a book that I had, I believe was out at the time and had in my mind, or certainly I became very interested in shortly after, was this book called Uncreative Writing by Kenneth Goldsmith. So again, the book is Uncreative Writing. If you go to writingthewrongway.com, I'll link to those things. But uncreative writing and conceptual poetry and conceptual fiction, in a really boiled down nutshell, is sort of the literary version of conceptual art, where there's different forms of conceptual art and conceptual writing, but they really boil down to ideas where you're taking text and producing and presenting the text as artworks, as literature in this case, but you are fundamentally more interested in the idea behind it than in the actual writing. So Kenneth Goldsmith, when he talks about conceptual writing, would say things like he didn't really think people should read his books. He just wanted them to kind of consider the idea of the book, and if you just knew what the book was about, you could assess it on those terms. Like, in other words, if you just read the back of the book, basically, you could judge the book. You didn't have to read the book. He didn't really understand why anyone would read his work and so on. He had a lot of bombastic claims, like he claimed to have he would fall asleep while editing his books. He was the most boring writer alive and so on. What I thought was interesting about Goldsmith's work and the other conceptual writers that I was looking at least some of their projects, was I felt that I understood the ideas behind conceptual writing, the idea of trying to emphasize the idea and the concept more than the actual text. But at the same time, I felt that it was doing a bit of a disservice to these texts, because if you actually read a lot of these works, like if you actually read some of Goldsmith's work, it's quite interesting. And the text itself is doing a lot of really interesting things. Even though, sometimes the authors themselves would just denigrate the value of the text in order to emphasize the value of the idea behind the text. And at the same time, I was getting interested in computer machine writing, so text that had been produced by machines or by software programs and so on. I was really interested in these two things. In particular, there's a book called The Policeman's Beard is Half Constructed, which is often billed as the first literary text, like literary book by a machine, by a software program, in this case called Racter. So there's some things to argue with around that claim, but again, I'll kind of link to more information with that if you're interested in it. But I was reading, the Racter book. I read, or at least was thinking about, a lot of these Goldsmith claims, and had, gotten more into conceptual writing, interested in it. I read a book called Reading the Illegible by Craig Dworkin, where it's a book of kind of literary analysis, but all he analyzes is texts that are illegible, so that they cannot be read. Texts where so I don't want to get too far into the kind of theory behind this, but I'll link to Reading the Illegible. It's an interesting critical book where, again, he's kind of examining the idea behind and the philosophy of, and some of the history and how you might read, an illegible text. A book that for whatever reason you don't have, the words are not accessible for reading, even though in other respects it is literature. And there are words, or maybe the words have been transformed, or maybe they're just not readable for some reason, or what have you, or they just don't make sense in that order, or whatnot. So anyway, around the same time I was getting interested in all this stuff, I was getting these spam. So I was trying to do some writing like this, do some of this conceptual writing. I had done a couple of different experiments, and I hadn't really hit on. I had the idea of, sorry, there's a dog in the background whining, but the dog's fine. He's just whining because he hears people outside. I'm in a studio right now. I just want to explain the dog for a second before I get back on the track. I'm in a studio here, the Chasing Artwork and GMB Creative studio, where I'm just kind of, popping in to do some work every now and again. With my kind of, company of sorts, Martian Embassy Media. But anyway, there's a dog here that Justin / Chasing Artwork is hosting at the moment. It's a very nice dog, but she likes to whine when people walk by. So anyway, rather than cut that out, I thought I'll just, let you know in case it happens again a couple of times. Otherwise, the dog's usually very quiet. So there's my digression. But I was talking about conceptual writing and how I was trying to write poems like this. So, I was trying to write a lot of work, and I was very dissatisfied with the work I was doing. Some of it was good, some of it was not good. Now, I started eventually getting interested in not writing so much with conceptual procedures, but mimicking them, or, kind of using procedures to generate first drafts and then rewriting those. But at this point in time, I was really just interested in doing pure conceptual procedures and generating text, just kind of experimenting with the different procedures and doing different things. And at this time, as if to taunt me, I started to get a lot of spam. And I got this weird class of spam where I would get, there'd be these ads for like penis enlargements or whatever, like the usual spam, right? But it would kind of come nestled inside or underneath it would be all these weird texts. And they were very much clearly a software program, some sort of spam bot program, taking text from somewhere else on the internet. So a lot of it was just sort of random words strewn together in various ways, but a lot of it I could recognize as clearly from old novels. So they were clearly pulling at one point from Project Gutenberg and all these old, public domain free e-texts that were just available online. From that place and just from other places, some spam bots were just taking big chunks of text and they were just appending it below it, in some weird combinatory, like they would just take excerpts from these big texts, just crush a bunch of it together, kind of collage all this text together and just put it at the end of the email that was advertising whatever the spam advertised. And this is how they would sneak an image past my spam filters. Because I'd get this image just advertising like penis pills or something, but then below would be all this text. And it looked like, I guess to my email program, it looked like somebody was sending me a real email with an attachment. So I started just copying and pasting all this material into a file. And I just started doing it. I didn't know what I was doing with it, but I just decided, it's interesting kind of to read, and I just started pasting into a file. And then I would delete the emails. So anyway, I did this for some time, and then I stopped getting the texts. And then I decided to just look through the file one day. And I just was kind of skimming through it. I had 100 plus pages of this text that had come through my spam filter. It was all, for the most part, it was being pulled from literary novels. I could see that. Some of it I wasn't sure what it was from, but it seemed from business proposals or other kind of business writing. Some was just weird, random, but very interesting, odd strings of words. Some was even broken up in like a poem. It would, if you didn't read it, if you kind of blurred your vision, it would look like a poem the way it was laid out on a page. But then all the words would be like avocado, aficionado. It would be these strange, long, complicated, multi-syllable words, just kind of strewn in no real order. So I'm looking through this big piece of text, and I just started I noticed there were a few classes of text. So one of them was there was just proverbs or explanations of proverbs. And one of them was just, again, these weird strings of multi-syllable words. Another one, it was, again, these novel excerpts from old public domain novels like The Red and the Black by Stendhal, or Gone with the Wind, or things like that. And then at the same time, there was you just see these sort of groups of types of language. So I started separating them out. I just kind of separated them into their own files. And I noticed I had a bunch of this stuff, and I was kind of interested in a lot of it because it was basically very poetic. The way that poetry works, just kind of throw a little bit of, a little bit more kind of theoretical idea your way. The way that poetry works fundamentally is it is a type of defamiliarized language. So that's what literary language is. It's this language that we encounter, but instead of the normal way we encounter language, which is language that is used to communicate, to convey information, or otherwise, communicate some message to us, in which case the value is clarity, right? Getting the message across to another person in a clear fashion. Literary language works a different way. Literary language takes this kind of communicative language and then starts to distort it. And it distorts it in a way where instead of having one clear meaning, the language now has these doubles or tripled meanings. So the clarity starts to become an issue in literary language. You don't necessarily understand everything you're reading. And the more you don't understand it, the more removed from normal communication it seems to be, the more literary it is potentially. Because the more removed from kind of one single fixed message meaning that the language is, the more that it opens to have these multiple meanings. And the further and further you get away from kind of normal communication, the more multivalent the language can be, the more it can mean, and then the more kind of it opens up for what we might call poetic use, for literary use. So what I was noticing with these chunks of text that the machines were sending me was they were kind of operating on this poetic level where they had a kind of weird interest as language objects. They had this poetic sort of tensions that were just kind of developing almost randomly. The machines would take two sentences from Gone with the Wind and just put them beside each other. And those two sentences maybe didn't make sense beside each other, but they would kind of almost make sense. So that you would eventually get things like this where I'm just going to read you a quick line from Gone with the Wind, chapter 2 in my book, Gone with the Wind. It would say things like, this is from chapter 1, Belshazzar by H. Rider Haggard. So you have a paragraph here in my version. So this is actually something that I preserved from the Spambot text. So it would say, I am he whose young daughter you wronged and murdered long ago. In those good days, women really had a chance. So I found these weird tensions like that. So it's I am he whose young daughter you wronged and murdered long ago. In those good days, women really had a chance. This weird two sentences beside each other that seemed to kind of be connected and seemed to kind of one negating the other, one having weird comical effect following the other. This really dark kind of revenge speech, serious line, and then it's kind of like, in those days women really had a chance. After just this discussion of women being murdered and everything, it was this really kind of weird set of tensions that would start to appear in a lot of these instances. So I was getting really interested in this because at the same time, like, I'm getting all this stuff the machines are sending to me. I'm literally trying to write poems like this, and I'm failing. Like, I'm not writing work this good. As the spam bot is sending me, it was very annoying. Like, every day I would open my email, and it would be like a bunch of really interesting conceptual poetry that I was just being sent by spam bots that was literally better than the conceptual writing I was producing myself. And I started to get kind of annoyed and disheartened. Felt like those robots were taunting me and like they were doing it on purpose or something. So eventually, though, I just decided, you know what, I'll just take this text and I'll use it. I assembled a manuscript, a book manuscript, length manuscript that I called the Inbox Project. And then I think at one point I changed the title to just Inbox, all in caps. And I put a whole 77-page poetry book manuscript together of this Inbox Project. And I separated it into 4 sections. There's a section called Cluster, a section called Someone Struggles, a section called Proverbs, and another section called This ebook is otherwise provided to you as is. And that section was the longest section. It was 35 chapters, or 35 of these, prose poems. Each one of them was basic. I went and I found out which books were having their text pulled from them, and I kind of separated out the texts that were clearly from different books, and I kind of figured out which book they were from, and I put the book as the title, the book and the author name as the title of that, section, and I kind of had these, I ended up with 76 of these little chapters, 76 poems / prose poem / chapters. And I cut it down to 35. So I found the top 35 out of 76, the ones that I just thought were the most interesting, and so on. And then I started going through them, and I started just recutting it. So what I noticed when I looked closely at the source text, I found a couple of these examples, and I look at the source text, and I tried to kind of figure out, well, what are the machines doing? And what the machines were doing was they were taking a big novel, say, Gone with the Wind, and they were just pulling out a very small portion of the text. They'd pull out, in this whole novel, they might pull out 30 sentences, let's say. And then it would just kind of, some of the sentences it would pull out more than once. So it'd double or triple some of the sentences. And then it would just kind of rearrange them in, I assume, kind of random order. So, you didn't necessarily have the text flowing how it would, and you wouldn't necessarily have, and you would sometimes have these doubledness in the text. Sometimes they'd even pull the warnings, warning, this is a Project Gutenberg e-text, and, it's free to distribute and disseminate and blah, 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 as long as you don't charge people, and it's free of all fees. So I noticed that that's what was happening with the text. And the other thing I noticed is that because even though the text kind of didn't make sense anymore, because imagine a novel of 300 some pages and you just take 30 sentences out and rearrange them in random order. Well, it doesn't make sense anymore, but you'd have the same names of characters cropping up again. If a character talked a certain weird way, in a lot of these old novels, they have odd accents. So a lot of those character ways of speaking would be kind of, preserved inside of the chapter, let's call it, unit. And of course, they'd have the same sort of style and tone, because originally a human author wrote all these same sentences. So there was a consistency inside of each of these texts. And there was almost this kind of elliptical or narrative. It almost seemed like you didn't really know what the story was, but you could sense there was some sort of story in the background of all this. Like the sentences they just connected, and they just seemed consistent just enough to sort of suggest this larger world, right? It was going on. And we were just kind of looking at maybe, again, just kind of tiny little random snippets or glimpses of this kind of big, expansive, larger world. So I thought they were really interesting. Like I say, I just took these 76 of them and boiled them down to 35. And then I used them as one part of this 4-part book called Inbox. And I forget if I sent the book out to people or not, but this is a period when I was writing a lot of books, but I wasn't really getting anything accepted for publication. I've done another podcast on this. You can go find. I think it's episode 4. So I think if you go to jonathanball.com/4, I believe you'll get the information on all these past rejected, failed projects I've gotten. It's 4 or 9. It's in the back catalog in any case. But if you search failed projects, Jonathan Ball, you'll definitely, you can search failed projects, Jonathan Ball. I mean, you can find for sure more information about these, the books that I've been writing. But Inbox is just one of these books that I wrote, and it just didn't really find a home. It didn't get published, didn't go anywhere. And usually, that stuff just goes in the drawer, right? But it was a project that kind of just kept pulling at me a little bit. And it got to the point where I wasn't really trying to publish the book anymore, because, as interesting as it was and as much as I liked it, I didn't think it was necessarily doing something super different from the other books I'd seen, except for this Inbox project section. It's I liked all the parts of the book, but I didn't feel they hung together necessarily in as much as I wanted them to, because they were all very different. Like the machine author doesn't have consistency, right? Except within a section. But I did like each section separately, so I kind of splintered it off, and I published some of them as chapbooks with different little tiny presses. But then this ebook section is so long, and it was about 40 pages in length, in my manuscript. So published, it probably would have been, if you were to actually publish that book, it would have been half the book, if not more than half the book. Even though I had cut almost more than half of I'd cut 60% of the material to get it down to that level. So at one point I decided, well, maybe I'll take this ebook and I'll just publish it as its own manuscript. I could put it together as its own manuscript. But then when you go through 70, so I pulled back I pulled it back to 76, the original 76, and I went through all of it. So that 41, or all 76 I went through, and I kind of reorganized it. So and I'll talk more about how I kind of was rewriting and organizing it in a second. But the point is, I went and I did a whole 76-page manuscript, or 76 section manuscript, but I just felt like it wasn't really an improvement on the 35 section manuscript. I felt like really all I was doing was I was doubling the length, and I was adding back in all the weaker material. So I tried it out, but then I immediately kind of went back to the original, here's a chunk of 35. And at that point, I just kind of gave up on it. I published sections of it here and there in journals and stuff. But eventually, I just kind of was it works as its own little book. It's like a weird little, experimental novella or something. But I don't know. It just didn't seem like anybody would be interested in it. By that point, I wasn't a conceptual poet. I'd done some conceptual poetry projects. And then in my book, The Politics of Knives, which I mentioned, if you order this book, I'll send you that one too. One section of The Politics of Knives, which is called That Most Terrible of Dogs, that section began its life as some of the spam text that didn't make its way into the Inbox project. I had a big long text where it was kind of the first draft of That Most Terrible of Dogs. What I ended up doing is I rewrote it all entirely. So I kind of just took the spam text and I just rewrote it all, just by hand. I just kind of literally like used it as a first draft and rewrote it in my own sort of style, and adding a lot of material, stripping most of the material away. It completely transformed. Like pretty much nothing, next to nothing of the original text survived into The Politics of Knives. That's kind of how I got my first draft of that poem. But then the rest of it wasn't really just going anywhere. Like I'd done these little chapbooks, like I say. I had this ebook was otherwise provided to you as is, all together. And I decided to eventually publish it as an ebook. And I thought, well, I'll just publish it as an ebook, and you know, maybe a couple of people would buy it. Maybe there's a few people I would give it away to, and so on. So I did that. I went through the text again, and I gave it some more editing. So at this point, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I edited the text, because Risha had some questions about, was I editing these texts? How was I editing them, and so on. Again, I was doing basically what I decided to do was I decided to make the text consistent in certain stylistic ways. So one of the things the machines had done is they had taken out all the, I don't know why this happened, by the way, but the machines, when they were sending me text, took out all the apostrophes, and they took out all the quotation marks. So I went and found the original text and I put back the quotation marks, but I kept out the apostrophes. It had been stripping away punctuation and stuff, so I decided, well, I will try to preserve the machine text as much as I can, but there's some instances where I just felt like it'd be nice to put the punctuation back in to just make it a bit more readable stylistically. So I decided, well, I'll put the apostrophes back in, but I don't necessarily need the quotation marks, so I won't put those back in. So I had decisions like that. I made a few kind of what you would call the stylistic decisions in terms of how do I make this machine-generated text a little more, not a lot, but just a little more approachable for readers. They're not getting hung up on things like the word can't. Is it in a contraction of cannot, or is it the word can't, which is actually a word. Then I decided to do, again, I had identified how the machines were creating this text. I could see that they were doubling certain things, like pulling the same line twice or 3 times sometimes. And I could also see they were disordering things. So I thought to myself, well, I'll do that same sort of thing when I edit. So my rule was I couldn't rewrite the text, and change it. It had to stay the same as in the original. If there was a spelling mistake that the machine introduced, then I corrected the spelling mistake to make it, back to the source text. Because sometimes what the machine would do is it would take 2 words and it would delete the space between the 2 words. So I would go back to the source text and I would figure out, okay, well, was there supposed to be space there, and so on, and I would put the space back in, say. So I would kind of correct machine errors, but I would otherwise keep the text the same. And then I felt free to move the text around, reorder it, and kind of add, paragraph breaks and things, because those are the sorts of things the machine authors had been doing. So my goal here wasn't a purely conceptual goal. I didn't want to really do pure conceptual writing in the sense of just, here's found text, I'm representing it to you. I wanted to kind of, I'm really interested in mimicking a conceptual writing style, or using parts of conceptual writing, but then doing, certain transformations or certain changes that kind of make the text itself work more. Because like I say, I don't buy the conceptual writing hook, line, and sinker. I understand its value in various ways. I agree with a number of the concepts that it has to offer, but I'm not a devotee or an acolyte, or some sort of disciple of Kenneth Goldsmith or any of this stuff. So I was doing a limited set of transformations, and partly it was an editing experiment for me. If I've got very 3 or 4 things, very few things I can actually do in an editing process, what could I do? And can I, what am I accomplishing? And then when I edit, I would think a lot about the editing. So again, I would cut and delete things because the machine had cut and delete most of the novel, really. It had just pulled these certain things. So sometimes I would cut and delete things. I would reorder things sometimes. And I would sometimes duplicate things, although usually I wouldn't. Usually if there's a duplication in the book, it's because the machine had done that duplication. But I would sometimes, say take out the sentence between two duplications so that now I have the two duplications right after each other, and it would highlight the repetition or do some other things like that. So I was doing and I would keep certain lines that I thought were especially interesting. So on page 71 of my book, the print book, Risha pointed out there's this line which reads, I'll just read it to you quick to make sure I'm quoting it right. I find that I'm not writing very coherently. So it's this line that seems self-reflexive. I was really looking for lines like this. I find that I'm not writing very coherently. Like a line that is in the original novel, like in this case, in a book called The Island of Desire by Robert Dean Frisby. The machine has pulled it out. And now that the machine has resituated it inside of this strange, experimental crushing down of the novel to like 20 sentences or something, it takes on a whole different meaning. Again, this is what poetic language does, right? It's a different meaning that's not kind of present in the original, in its new conceptual context, in this conceptual poem / novella. We've got this other meaning where it seems to be talking about itself. It's almost like the machine speaking as a writer and saying, I find I'm not writing very, very coherently. So I would take lines like that. I would kind of identify lines that I thought had these double meanings and potentials for kind of new meaning in my text. And I would just kind of like reorder things or delete things or just otherwise restructure the text to highlight that. So in this case, I put it at the end of a paragraph, and I made it, a very small paragraph of 2 sentences only. So it's very, if you're actually reading the text, it kind of draws attention to itself in a certain way. The other line that Risha points out, I'm really glad she noticed this, is the last line of my book it's from Stendhal's The Red and the Black. So I specifically put this chapter and this line as the very end of the book. So the very last paragraph is, their true character was only now beginning to outline itself before his eyes. Ah, sir, a novel is a mirror carried along a high road. So that paragraph to me is really important. Again, I specifically moved those 2 sentences to put them at the end of this chapter and also at the end of the whole book. The first sentence here, their true character was only now beginning to outline itself before his eyes. So I liked that particular sentence as the second last one because it's bringing in the idea that you actually made it to the end of this book and you read the whole 98-page book at this point. Here's a line that seems to kind of speaking about you as a reader and saying almost mockingly, like, the true character of this book is only now beginning to sort of come into focus. But now it's over. And so there's sort of this weird sadness or elegiac quality to it, I feel. And then the second part, the very last line, ah, sir, a novel is a mirror carried along a high road. I love that idea when you kind of take it out of context a little bit, because it reminds me of a Rorschach test and the inkblot test that psychologists used to use. And the concept of the inkblot test, I'd read a book called The Inkblot Record, with this great conceptual writing book called The Inkblot Record by Dan Farrell that I highly recommend. And I'll link to in the show notes here at writingtherwrongway.com. But the inkblot test, the Rorschach test, the concept behind it fundamentally is that you're looking at these kind of meaningless shapes. They're just these shapes of nothing. And if you see anything in it, it's something that your mind has put there. if it means anything to you, it's something that you have inserted that meaning. You've kind of interpreted it in a way that makes it meaningful to you. And I think on one hand, that's what literary interpretation is. Like obviously in a more normal book, the author has certain things they're trying to say to you, and there's kind of a coded set of messages often. But the other side of it is the reader is reading into it. The reader's literally looking at this ink on paper, just like on an inkblot test, and putting in as much, if not more, than the author is intending. Here we've got these machine authors that don't intend anything. And you've got me as a quote-unquote author who's just sort of this second layer of manipulation, who's just trying to get effects. Like I'm not necessarily trying to say a particular thing so much as like just engineer certain reactions in you and particular effects. And a sort of, I'm kind of almost trying to engineer a text that walks a weird line between being kind of interesting and compelling and frustrating and hard to understand. And so I think that ending line is really interesting because the idea of a novel as a mirror, one that's reflecting back towards you in a manner of speaking. And on the other hand, like this idea that you have like Stendhal's original context is more like the novel is a mirror along a high road, right? Like that the novel is sort of reflecting the world towards you, whereas I'm maybe sort of reframing it a bit as the novel sort of hold it as an inkblot test that is kind of in front of your face and is reflecting back, kind of this you as a sort of distorted world. So a lot of my editing, like I say, was just sort of re-engineering this found text to kind of do things like this. Engineer these weird little, intensify the things I was noticing in the text by kind of eliminating a lot of the stuff around it, and then sort of restructuring some of the text in a way that highlighted certain meta ideas that I was interested in. So that's why I didn't frame the book with any explanation. Like if you actually order a copy of this book and I send it to you, it doesn't really have like a back. The back cover is just the front cover reversed in like a mirror image. It more or less, like there's not like an explanation on the back or somewhere else in the book about like how you should read this book or what it is and so on. You just kind of open it up and you dive in. But then the other thing I did is I put some clues in strategic locations. So each chapter says like chapter 1, then it has like the title of a novel, and then it has the author of the novel as a subtitle of the chapter. So that's giving you a bit of a clue, right, as to what is happening here. And then I preserved certain mistakes the machine made. So the machine, for example, if they pulled, in chapter 1, the machine pulls from this novel Belshazzar, but it pulled also some of the meta text. So the first paragraph of the book is, at that moment, the moon that had been half hidden by a cloud shone out fully. End of this Project Gutenberg of Australia book by Belshazzar by H. So I moved that to the first paragraph of the first chapter, the very opening of the book, because one, I wanted it to begin in medias res, like a good novel should. So it sort of just throws you into this weird world at that moment. It begins with this kind of transition as if a bunch of stuff had been happening we don't know about, and then at that moment, this new thing happened. It sets the scene. And then the second sentence of my book is, end of this book, end of this Project Gutenberg of Australia book, Belshazzar by H. And it's H because the period, so the machine has made two mistakes. One, it thinks the period for H. Rider Haggard, like the period before for the initial of the author's name, it thinks the period is a period at the end of a sentence, and it's not. And I preserve that mistake. And then it also thinks that end of this Project Gutenberg of Australia book, Belshazzar by H, is something that H. Rider Haggard wrote in his novel, and it's not. So my first two sentences are kind of throwing you in the world of this novel and this weird text that I've developed, and then immediately saying it's over, but throwing you out of it, right? And kind of maybe making you notice the mistakes that are happening. And if you're looking really closely, you might be able to just figure out, okay, well, here's what's happening. And then if you haven't figured that out yet, at the end of the first page, the last lines on the first page are, to contact Project Guten. It's just a bunch of like gibberish text. Then the second line, you have the title of the book. This book is otherwise provided to you as is. Now that was originally this ebook, just like Australia Book was ebook originally. And if you buy the ebook version of this book, it'll say ebook. I'll get in a second to why I made that change specifically, but I just want to point out, like, the first page I put basically like 4 or 5 different clues as to the origins of this text and how this text operates. And I specifically, like I say, I reorganized the text to move all that to the first page, just like I reorganized like certain things for the last page. And I don't have as much of this kind of interruption by meta text in the rest of the book. There's a few instances of it, but I put a lot of it in the first chapter. I have a couple instances elsewhere in the book in case you just kind of, once you really forget about it, maybe I bring it back. But otherwise, I'm really locating these in particular strategic locations, not to make things clear necessarily, but just to give you, let's say, a chance at clarity. It just gives you this chance of like figuring out what I'm doing, rather than giving you an explanation. And at the same time, and the epigraph of the whole book, it kind of does the same sort of thing. So the epigraph of this book is, welcome to the world of free, plain, vanilla electronic text, books readable by both humans and by computers since 1971. So again, this kind of Project Gutenberg, meta text that I'm just using at the very start here. Now, like I say, I published Soul as an ebook in 2014, but of course, because it was an ebook only, pretty much, and because it's this weird thing, basically nobody read it. A few people kind of read it and were interested in it and so on, but fundamentally nobody read it because it just wasn't really available. I wasn't really promoting it. I had 2 other books out that year by like real print books by bigger presses than like me in my garage kind of thing, right? So I was promoting those books, and I wasn't really pushing this book in any way. I didn't want to be like, on a book tour or something, or in the press talking about these other books of mine that, University of Toronto Press or Insomniac Press is putting out. And then like I'm spending all my time talking about this weird little thing that I'm doing as a joke, not quite a joke, but like, basically a kind of weird experiment, right? So I didn't really talk about it. I just kind of put it out, and a few people noticed it, but no one really noticed it. So when Amazon started to really push their publishing program a bit more, I started to investigate like the print-on-demand stuff a bit. What I noticed in recent years was that print-on-demand had started really substantially improving its quality. And I decided, it would be a fun little print-on-demand experiment to just, do a print version of this book just for fun. I wouldn't have to be releasing it. It's already been released years ago, but why not just, do a little print-on-demand thing? That way I can get a few copies of it, at a relatively low price point compared to, trying to print like 1,000 of them or something ridiculous. So I decided just as an experiment to learn like how print-on-demand and other things like that work, because students were always asking me about it. So I don't know a whole lot about self-publishing compared to traditional publishing. I'm more of a traditional publishing guy in the traditional publishing world. I'm getting more interested in hybrid and self-publishing, but I don't know a whole lot about it. Students are always asking me about it though. So I thought to myself, well, why don't I just do a project that's relatively easy. It's a book I've already done. I've already released it as an ebook. I'll just do a print companion to it. And then people can, get the print companion as well if they want. And if so, I'll just give them the free ebook with it or something. So I decided to do it. I got SMBico to, design, to lay it out for me and, do all these things. Went to go publish it on Amazon. Or release on Amazon. Like I say, it all really had been published years ago. And, whatever. So the ebook, they come back to me. I get, this email from like Amazon itself, like from people working at Amazon. They say to me, look, you can't publish this book because you're putting out a print book, but the title is This eBook. And we will not allow you to publish a print book called This eBook. Because what if people order a print book and thinking they're going to get an ebook, and then they get a print book? You denied. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, are you guys serious? And now I'm in contact with Amazon, which is notoriously difficult to do. I don't know why they're wasting their time with me, but I'm going back and forth with Amazon now, this massive conglomerate. And I'm just kind of like, so I'm like, look, guys, this book is currently on Amazon as this ebook in an ebook edition. I'm just trying to add a print option for people. And at the same time, guys, so I've set it up, of course, so that if they do accidentally order a print book thinking they're going to get an ebook, it'll ship them a print book and it also will email them an ebook. So they will get the ebook. It's they will get the ebook even if they accidentally order the print book. 2, I say, the book's title is a warning. The title of the book is, This ebook is otherwise provided to you as is. I'm so what's funnier than you order an ebook, you get a print book, and the print book is literally, says, look, this is as is. This ebook is as is. If it's print, what can we do? We told you. So the joke of it, part of the joke at that point to me was, you order an ebook and you get a print book, and the print book says, sorry, this ebook is faulty. But no refunds, no guarantees. And it's all this out of copyright text. So, there's a couple levels to where I saw it operating as a kind of conceptual work and also, as a joke of sorts. And I had just done this anthology of, experimental writing that has joke structuring, which, this book called Why Poetry Sucks. Anyway, Amazon was like, nope, having none of it. I understand it. They actually said to me, we understand exactly what you're trying to do. And we understand that for the artistic purposes of what you're doing, it has to have, you have to be able to do this and this and this, but we're still not going to allow you to do it because, of quality concerns. Basically, they were concerned that people would accidentally be upset and frustrated if they, ordered an ebook on Amazon and received a print book because they actually had ordered a print book, not knowing it. So SM Biko, Samantha, just said, look, why don't you just change the name to This Book? Then you got these, 2 versions, and the title of this book works better as a print object anyway. And I was like, yeah, you're right. It does work better as a print object for it to say This Book, and it's kind of more interesting if you have these 2 editions that have basically the same book with one a title difference, and then inside the interior text you just take ebook and change it into book. So that's why I went and I changed ebook to book throughout. Where the book was referring to itself at least, or books were referring to themselves. But otherwise, so it's this weird, and that of course somehow satisfied Amazon. Hilariously, didn't care at all about the fact that I haven't written one word in the book. But I guess, technically it's not a copyright violation, anything I'm doing, even though, and you could argue, I suppose, that it is now copyrighted to me, although I released it under a Creative Commons license, like I do all my poetry books. So, that's my sort of long roundabout explanation as to what this thing is. So if you got this book, if I mailed one to you, because I mailed a few out to people, I've only got a very limited amount of them that I produced. So you can order them on Amazon, like I say, but I would encourage you not to order them on Amazon. I set the price quite high on Amazon to discourage people from ordering from Amazon. So if you order them directly from me, it's a lower price. I'll sign it. And then I'll additionally, so I think on Amazon it's something like $26 plus shipping. It's ridiculously high for a book that's, under 100 pages and is one of the most bizarre things you'll ever see. But, it has a really beautifully designed cover by SM Biko and so on. And I think is a really interesting book in other respects. But if you order directly from me, if you go to jonathanball.com/thisbook, so jonathanball.com/thisbook, $20, and I think a small shipping fee depending on where you're at. $20, I'll ship you the book in print. I'll send you an email that gives you links to download the ebook version, and I'll send you out a copy of The Politics of Knives, which has, a bunch of other kind of more traditional but also kind of unusual texts. One of which also began as origins in the ebook project. But otherwise, The Politics of Knives, there's all sorts of poems about all manner of things. It was put up by Colchester Books in 2012. It has a series of prose poems about the movie Psycho by Hitchcock, and it's got all sorts of really unusual. It's got a great little poem about the castle by Kafka, where Kay, to get into the castle, transforms into a camera. It's kind of weird, surreal, novelesque, experimental short fiction / poems. So if you're hearing this podcast, those are the things I will offer you. Otherwise, I'm not really promoting or publicizing this book. It's just this weird little secret that only a few of us know about. So, Risha, I hope that answered all your questions. I think I addressed them all. Oh, you had one last question, which was my prior reading. Did having read any of these original source texts alter or affect how I was reorganizing the text? So the short answer is no. I made an effort to only use books I hadn't read. So there's an exception, which is 1984. So 1984 by George Orwell. Of course, I have read that book. The other books, but I didn't remember it very well because I had read it so long ago. But I made a few, decisions in there. Like I took the material from the novel's end or near the end of the novel, and I put it at the end of my section. So I made a few kind of ordering decisions in 1984 because I'd read the original text. But the other ones, either I had never read them or I had completely forgotten them. And so I tried specifically to cut out, with that one exception, I cut out ones that I knew well, and I kept in ones I didn't know well or didn't know too much about. And I did that decision because I wanted to make sure that I was really focusing on the text in front of me rather than kind of, again, remembering the text that existed. But if you do know those original source texts well, I think they'll be like this, it'll have a bit more of a impact because you'll be bringing more to the table as a reader, in a manner of speaking. So you're kind of, again, if you think of the novel as a Rorschach mirror sort of combination, you'll be reflecting back to yourself more than you might otherwise. So, hope you enjoyed that, kind of path of a project. Go to jonathanball.com/thisbook to get a little bit more information and check it out. Maybe pick up a copy if you're interested in weird, rare, low-run books. I've only got 50 of them in print currently. I may not do more than 50 in ever. So it's a pretty small, relatively, $20 for 2 books plus an ebook, not too bad. Politics of Knives, I think, is by itself $18. So you're getting a steal of deal if you do decide to pick it up. But fundamentally, I just kind of made this book for the few people who I think would, kind of really cotton to it. And I hope you like it if you do get a chance to check it out. But even if you don't ever want to check it out, I think just kind of looking at the path of a project is sort of an interesting thing sometimes. So there's a project that really has had a lengthy multi-year path. It's gone through very different set of origins, and I made a lot of decisions in the course of it, which were they the best decisions? I guess you'd have to judge that yourselves. But there's a logic to decisions. I think that the thing I always try to emphasize when I teach creative writing, or even when I'm just kind of thinking about my own practice or talking to people about their practices, is I think it helps to kind of walk a weird line between doing things on instinct and kind of wanting a visceral tension or reaction from a reader, and kind of establishing tensions in a text. And then on the other hand, having like a kind of analytical, thoughtful approach to the editing process or to how you're moving about things. And I think on even just a simpler level, I like how the text turned out, and that's why I decided to publish it, where I published it. And again, I only published 35 of 76 of these things. So I didn't publish everything I did by any means, but I learned a lot taking a text that kind of wasn't my own and treating it like it was my own, but with certain rules. I could only do certain things, and so my editing process was very restricted. And as a result, I really learned a lot about doing those sorts of things, like putting this beside this, and juxtapositions and deletions, and how to focus and orient a reader towards certain sentences and away from other things, and control the flow a bit more than, say, the meaning of the text. But the flow of the reading experience was something I was kind of more focusing on, because there was no real meaning that I was trying to convey, or I didn't remember the original context of the material or whatever. So always worth trying an experiment. You can always publish it if you like it, and you don't have to. Like I say, when all said and done, I published very little of the work I did with these spam texts. But I did publish some. I got some work I'm really proud of out of it. I got some interesting kind of oddities, for my, let's call them hardcore fans or whatever, to, enjoy. And at the same time, maybe most importantly, it was a really fun and enjoyable process. I learned a lot, helped me get my ego out of the way a bit in terms of, I literally had to recognize that these machines were unconsciously doing a better job than me. And maybe the reason was that they weren't trying to say something, but they were instead setting up a situation where the reader could say something or to themselves, kind of using the work as a mirror or a feedback loop. So, hope you enjoy this book, as otherwise provided to you as is. Keep writing the wrong way.